Are live.
All right, everybody. Welcome to episode 21 of the Beef and Bitcoin podcast. This is a special episode. We're trying out a slightly new format with a quick chat just on one particular topic. This is the first time trying one of these shorter format podcasts, so let us know what you think about this. If it gets good traction and we get a lot of listens, maybe we'll keep doing some of these single topic episodes. But with that being said, man, how you doing? It's Monday.
It's Memorial Day, and it's Monday. Yes, it is. I'm doing good. This is a pretty good tweet thread by the Jesse Colombo we're going to cover here, just as CH said here, just a little different format. But this tweet thread is basically discussing the rise in consumer prices, or we'll probably discuss CPI, which is Consumer Price Index, and just the incredibleness, I guess you could say, of how much goods have risen, especially since the delinkage of gold in the 70s. But we'll just start off, and I'll just read this first tweet here and the second one here, and I'm going to quote him directly. Did you know that the cost of goods and services in the United States did not change much from the late 1700s until 1913? Americans did not experience the steady, long-term upward creep of living costs, i.e. inflation, the way we do today. I need a chart here, but I'm going to read his second tweet quickly. Unfortunately, all of that changed when the Fed was founded in 1913, and then the US dollar fully lost its backing by gold in 1971. That led to massive inflation and explosion of debt. And the chart here basically is just US Consumer Price Index. And for the most part, it stayed between. It's just eyeballing this chart here. It's pretty basic.
Yeah, it goes back from 1800.
Yeah, so it goes from it starts in 1800. I should have mentioned that, and it stays between roughly probably 20 and somewhere around maybe 50. So between 20 and 50 for the better part of almost 150 years. Yeah, 150 years, and then slowly crept up during the Vietnam War, and then after 71 it delinked and skyrocketed past 150, obviously, and it's currently somewhere around 750. So I mean, prices have went up enormous, and I think the most obvious thing CH and I discuss here is groceries. I think everyone experiences this. You can't go grocery shopping without spending a lot of money. Like $20 does not go far in a grocery store these days. I think you could speak about that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I see it, especially with my particular carnivorous type of diet. Paying for steaks and meats and stuff like that, it can get pricey. But I'll tell you what, it keeps you very aware of even slight price fluctuations at the grocery store. And there was a price increase on ribeye actually just this year. Typically, you could get that for $9.99 a pound at Costco, and I think that's gone up to $10.99 and also $11.99 sometimes, depending upon the week. But I mean, when you look at that chart, and for those of you who aren't watching on YouTube, I mean, you can see it's 100 plus years of very little price fluctuation from the Consumer Price Index, and let's say the second fluctuation comes after the founding of the Federal Reserve in 1913, and you can just see how stable prices were when we were on a sound money type of standard, and money meant something, and it was backed by gold, and there was a level of trust that you had in the money that was being used, that it wouldn't inflate over time. And I even remember my grandmother telling me this when I was a kid, and she said her father used to tell her that the prices of goods don't increase, but the money just becomes worth less. And I don't know, maybe she told me that 20 years ago, and she was trying to explain what inflation was to me, and it didn't really make sense because I was probably questioning, like, why do things go up in price over time. Like, why would you just raise the price of a good? And you know, she kind of explained to me that it's not that the prices of goods are going up. It's just that the money is becoming worth less. But unless you know how money works, you wouldn't understand why the prices of things would just increase naturally. Like when you think about unregulated industries, or let's say industries with less regulation, like electronics or consumer products, the performance of those goods has increased substantially over time, and their prices have decreased at the same time. So you see that deflation in, you know, say a cellular phone was extremely expensive in the 80s, 90s for like very minimal performance. Now you have a supercomputer in your pocket for sometimes even just a few $100, and that would have been just unthinkable a decade ago or more. So you can see that you see the deflation in those particular goods. But it's amazing to really look at that CPI just skyrocket right at 1971 when we delinked the dollar from gold, and that was kind of, it's been off to the races ever since.
Yeah, it really has. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can see the chart I have up, which is the Dow Jones Industrial Average and quarterly bars, and it's just really zoomed out. But I mean, you can see the inflation is inevitable here, and they call it the millennial boom, and that's what it is. I mean, what do you think here? I mean, it's pretty.
Yeah, I mean, it's been, you can see the periods of when a sound money was kind of in place and very little fluctuation. It was you know, heading along probably with GDP, right? Similar growth rates. And then you just have this takeoff point. And I guess it makes sense, because if you know that your fiat money or your dollar is becoming worth less, well, you're gonna move that into other more productive assets, which could be, it could be real estate, it could be stocks, it could be anything else that is producing a cash flow. And you sit and think to yourself, okay, well, I'd rather have my fiat, which is an unproductive asset, be put into a productive asset. But there was a time when you didn't need to be a financial professional to just beat inflation, right? Like you have the average person can't and shouldn't be, you know, picking stocks just to not lose a ton of his wealth through inflation. They would want to invest, let's say, a third of their wealth in their business, a third of their wealth in land that they own, and maybe a third of their wealth in gold or cash in this case. And you can't really do that. If you do that, you're going to really suffer from inflation, and that's tough. And you can see it in asset prices. You can see it in real estate across the globe, and you can see it in the global equities markets. Just this substantial increase in the last few decades. And I think you were the one who told me about that one site that shows the prices of certain assets, like compared to gold, or if they were priced in gold, and like the returns are not nearly as large as they would have been as if they were measured in, you know, your traditional currency, right?
Yes, you're right. Pricinggold.com. And there's usually, you can click on, if you're watching YouTube, you can obviously see it. It's fine. Oh, there we go. I was looking for the S&P 500 versus gold. This is always an interesting chart. You can see this, right?
Yep.
Yeah, there you go. It's pretty interesting. You want to explain it?
No, go for it.
Okay, I'll go into this. Yeah, the peak of the S&P 500 in gold was actually at the in 2000, when the stock market, that was a huge peak for the tech bubble. Obviously was there, but then even the Dow Jones Industrial Average and the S&P still, and globally too, everything peaked with the new millennium. You know, that whole euphoric period, and everything slid in 2001, 2002. But it wasn't near as, you know, it was bad, but not catastrophic, you know, as 2008. And you see here, Um, we are now at 60 grams in gold. Technically, it's the S&P 500 versus 100 and looks like 70 was the peak, 168 in 2000. So it's not even close, and that's the reality. Like, cause gold had a huge run from, I don't know, it was like $300. Actually, I had pulled up in a chart over here. Gold went from like $300 to something like 2000 almost, I think, or
Mm-hmm.
1900. It was like 1900. But I mean, so that explains, would make sense. Gold rose a shit ton versus the S&P during a very short time.
Right. And if you were to, I guess this is a good time to kind of compare that to Bitcoin and a scarce fixed asset. Similar to gold, I guess their stock to flow ratio is coming closer together with the next halving coming up. But it's interesting to see the performance of similar types of assets, for lack of a better term, and how they perform relative to other assets that are always measured in fiat. And I think that's going to be interesting to see over time, especially when you try to measure like how many sats is a dollar worth, and the amount of sats that you can get for a dollar continues to decrease. I think eventually at some point, I don't even know if we're going to talk about the price of like one Bitcoin in
Yeah,
USD.
it's
Like,
gonna be.
like
I
eventually you'd start thinking about it in dollars or in satoshis, right? But that cross measurement into back to fiat, where you can have a better sense of, well, how many sats is it per, and maybe it's going to be per dollar or whatever. Um, I guess it depends how large the numbers get, but eventually you might not even talk about it in a per Bitcoin price.
Yeah, you're exactly right there. The numbers start to get stupid. And the problem I have right now is like no one's talking about this. It looks ridiculous. We're like at 87. Oh, we've hit 8,900. And this time when that happened, whatever in 2017, it was a big deal in November. Like everyone was talking about it, and no one's talking about it now. So I mean, I guess most normies aren't going to care till 20K at this point. I mean, that's really what, and that scares me because like, okay, well, what happens when people FOMO at 20K? Or really start to FOMO. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
The
It's a good
numbers, the
question.
numbers look really stupid, dude.
Yeah,
A
somebody
double, a
actually.
double at 20K is 40K, and then people are like, wow, it's going to get retarded.
Yeah, somebody was actually just saying we're like 127% away from all-time highs again, which for anything else you'd say like, oh, well, that's going to take a while, but you
Yeah.
like never know with Bitcoin, and that's that's where like it's and I'm definitely not going to suggest that I think that's going to happen over the weekend or in the next couple of weeks or months, but
You
it
just don't
it
know.
it can it can, and that's where you need to just be prepared, because and the only reason I keep bringing this up is because people keep DMing me and saying like, oh, I wish I would have started stacking sooner, like am I too late, did I miss it? So I know that the stacking sats thing didn't, it meant a lot to a lot of people, and I think a lot of people started stacking in the bear market and got over that fear of, is it really going to drop lower? But when you end up waiting too long to stack or try to catch a dip, you can just miss out on huge moves. So every day you're out of the market is a day where you could potentially miss a huge up move, and there might not be that many of them per day or per year. Maybe there's between 10 and 30 huge moves, and if you're not in um, the market during that time, like you miss out on those moves. That's it, and now you have to try to play catch up. But yeah, let's. I'm gonna keep moving on to this tweet thread. If you want to bring it back up on your screen. All right. So yeah, I'm gonna try to group some of these together. So the next part that Jesse Colombo talks about is radical leftist socialists refuse to address the real drivers of U.S. inequality, unlike myself. Why is this the case? It's because they're disingenuous snakes that don't want to actually solve our problems. They want to institute socialism. AOC can't debunk my arguments. AOC doesn't have the intelligence to debunk my arguments. Yet she's demanding socialism, which is terribly unethical and an inefficient system. I'm putting my foot down and stopping this movement. So help me God. Then Jesse goes on to say, if you voted for Bernie in 2016 and or plan on voting for him in 2020, you absolutely have to read my report. And that's in the Explaining Capitalism website. If you actually read what I wrote, it will change your mind on capitalism versus socialism debate. This is really interesting because, and I do hate to get or talk politics about it, but I think this is where Bitcoin really shines, because I wouldn't have necessarily cared about this particular topic had it not been for Bitcoin. And it's very easy to empathize with why so many people might think that socialism is a good idea and a very morally correct option. And I hate to put it that way because it's pitched in that way in a lot of schools, and the way a lot of your typical Keynesian economics is explained to most people, you would think that that's a good thing, and that well, why don't we just get the government to pay for all this stuff if they can kind of pay for these problems to go away? And that's it's never historically worked, and I do empathize for those that think it can work, because it's tough times, man. Like, the reason Jesse wrote this tweet thread is because the inequality in the United States and across the globe has gotten worse, but it's certainly not because of capitalism. It's because of anything socialist tendencies that the governments can implement. And it also has a lot to do with fiat money, because if you don't have fiat money, none of it's possible, because you need the keys to the printing press in order to pay for a lot of the stuff that doesn't end up working. And then there's, you have this backstop, and the taxpayers end up paying for everything. And that's where Bitcoin comes in, because you won't be able to pull that off in a world where Bitcoin is being used as money. Nobody is going to give up their Bitcoin to pay for things that don't work. It's just not going to happen. And you can't create something out of nothing and use that same money to pay for it. So you're going to see people have to really provide great goods and services, even if they're coming from any government across the globe, for someone to actually pay for them. And it's Jesse's the man, because he's a financial analyst. He's kind of like an economist of sorts. He's very, very in tune with the Austrian school, so he has obviously very logical arguments for all this stuff. But it's just going to be awesome to see how Bitcoin kind of debunks these things one after one, just automatically, without having to do any arguing. Like, it's just gonna happen, and everyone's just gonna have to come to terms with that. And we won't need to be explaining to anybody why it doesn't work. It will just end up becoming so obvious once fiat money starts to go away.
Exactly. You just nailed it on the head there. This whole thing stems from just basically worthless paper money gets printed or digitally printed now. In like 2008, 2009, the whole system collapses, and the only reason that there's a lot of banks around that should have went under, things like AIG, a bunch of other companies that took bailouts, is because of the ability to print money. Yes, obviously the taxpayer paid for it with bailouts, but reality is the whole system has been propped up now on a bunch of just money that's been printed. And so basically they've taken away your purchasing power, so they've stolen from you. And that's the reality of where we are today. And that's why things that even 15, 20 years ago that were much less expensive are now just insanely priced. And it's getting very noticeable in certain areas. I think in major cities, obviously it's more noticeable than small town America, but still it's obviously it's encroaching everywhere. There's no doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can see how the inflation is really seen in any of the products and services that the government can put more regulations on. So it's not a surprise that healthcare gets more and more expensive over time because there's so many regulations that have to do with that. And if you know how much it might cost, even your family doctor to manage like the HIPAA compliance laws is probably insane. And then you have their malpractice insurance on top of that, which keeps going up every single year because the verdicts and settlements keep going up by orders of magnitude every few years. That it's just making it impossible to even pay for your traditional service. I think I went to the family doctor the other day and I saw the doctor for a few minutes and it was like a $250 bill, and I have really good insurance. And it's it's almost like, well, how, if luckily I can afford to pay my health care bills, but like, the average person can't do that, so they're not going to even go to the hospital. So when I think about how much it costs to just be healthy and get good information, like it's not that expensive to do that. You can look it up yourself, but the average person might not take the time to do that, and they're going to have to pay $250 a pop to go see the doctor, who's might not give them the best information anyway. It kind of sucks. And you see the same thing in housing, like housing prices going out of control, school educational costs are through the roof, up, I don't know, 200, 300% in the last 2 or 3 decades. It's just the inflation's definitely happening. It's just hidden in such a way that you're not really seeing it and thinking about it super critically, because you can get a student loan very easily. They want you to take out, a $50,000 loan to go to a 4-year college, but they won't give you a $50,000 loan to start a business. So it's the incentives just aren't there. Like you're going to take out the loan and go to school and piss away X number of dollars, and then you're stuck with that. And then you're going to ask for a bailout to pay for your loans because you were, I mean, I almost hate to put it this way, but a lot of people are kind of deceived into going to school and thinking that's a really good investment of their money. And I take education very seriously, but I don't necessarily believe anymore that going to your traditional university is the best use of,
Time,
twenty
money,
to $150,000. I mean, like it's really not. I'm glad that I went. I had a good time. I had a full ride to go, but had I had to spend $100,000, like I'd still be paying that off probably. And believe me, nothing that I learned in school I use today. You have to learn everything on the job, as with just like anything else. So it's only important because they say that you need it, but more and more companies are starting to wake up to the fact that that's not necessarily the case, and you can hire good employees for an honest wage that don't necessarily need the same level of education that you think they might have needed in the first place. And you're seeing that right now, mainly with software development, which is great because I think I saw something from Tim Cook the other day saying that he doesn't think software developers necessarily need a computer science degree in order to become proficient at programming. And that's certainly the case. And any job like that where you're just learning a normal skill, you're going to be able to learn that online for free on YouTube, reading Twitter. I mean, doing anything. You can learn almost any skill. And that's a complete game changer from even a decade ago. And I think that's where we're going to head because, the free market's going to demand it. No one's going to take out a $150,000 loan to not get a job 4 years later. That's just the reality.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to top onto that. It's become such an just unrealistic cost, and it's as we've seen with society, it's 1.6 trillion in debt. Student loan debt now is 1.6 trillion. And so it's gotten just off the rails. And I'm going to keep it short here, but long story short, a lot of people are going to college and they're realizing that what they got the degree in is nothing what they end up doing, business wise. And I hear it all the time. And And then you keep hearing the same thing. Just get a degree. It's all you need. And it makes zero sense then. It's like, well, why are people spending hundreds of thousands of dollars? Well, not always hundreds of thousands, but still 5 figures, and it could be 50, 60, $70,000 in debt that, saddles them down throughout their 20s and 30s, and it's insane. And I'm going to just finish off this Keynes quote, and it says, as economist John Maynard Keynes succinctly stated, Lenin is said to have declared the best way to destroy the capitalist system was to debauch the currency. By a continuing process of inflation, governments can confiscate secretly and unobserved an important part of the wealth of their citizens. By this method, they not only confiscate, but they confiscate arbitrarily, and while the process impoverishes many, it actually enriches some. And I think we'll just leave you with that quote for the end of the day, guys.
Yeah, definitely. Keynes absolutely knew what he was doing when he was getting all of his works prepared to shill to governments across the globe, and it's pretty obvious. So yeah, let that sink in. The man that wrote a lot of the text that we learn in school definitely knew that inflation was a great way to hide the taxation of the citizens, and it's tough to see, but you have a choice now. You can opt out if you want to. So think about that, and let us know what you think about this different format, a little quicker of an episode, one topic. If you like it, let us know. Shoot us a DM. We'll start doing more of these.